Hey, welcome back to Jetlagged, the podcast all about TCKs and what it's like to grow up overseas. I'm your host, Noah, and today I'm joined by co-host Elizabeth and guest Kai. Today we're going to talk about friends.
So this episode, we're going to be talking about and hopefully answering some questions that my friend Lila sent in. And just as a disclaimer, we're going to be talking about this from our own experiences, but we recognize that this doesn't necessarily apply to all TCKs or non-TCKs, even if we use those terms. Again, these are our own personal experiences and not a broad generalization that applies to everyone.
Okay, so moving on to our first question. Do you feel like you're able to make friends quickly? Kai.
This is something that I see in a later question that I might also touch on, but it's like it's 50-50 and it depends on context.
Yeah.
Like, is this a homeschool co-op where we see them every week and it's just you're kind of become friends out of circumstance, or is this just something where you're actually trying to make a friend because you're either to help you through transition or just having more friends, more contacts, people to talk to?
How about for you, Elizabeth?
I'd say, I don't think I make friends quicker than other people do or slower than other people do. It just really depends on the person themselves. And I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, I don't really consider myself true friends with someone until we've had at least one serious conversation about things that are important to them or close to their heart, or just, a more serious conversation. So I could know someone for a year, and if we only see each other in a group setting or talk about silly things, then I wouldn't feel like we're really good friends.
That's interesting. I think it depends, as like Kai said, the circumstances and stuff. One thing I feel like is how desperate you are to make friends. I feel like in desperation you will, or at least personally, I will want to make friends no matter what. But I've been blessed and lucky to have been surrounded and been in a community where there is so many awesome people that I can be friends with in every city and country that I've lived in, including Tbilisi. So I would say for the question, I'm able to make friends quickly, but it also depends if I have a bunch of friends or if I have no friends. Yeah. What is the hardest part of becoming a friend with someone?
I think the initial conversations of getting to know them and also knowing how close they feel to you, because I don't know, sometimes I'm ready to be talking about really intense stuff and they're like, whoa, why are you? I'm not good with that. Or the part of getting to know them after the initial meeting them.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that makes sense at all.
No, that does. How about for you, Kai?
I feel like the hardest part for me personally isn't like starting to talk to someone. It was starting to talk to someone for the longest time. But now if I find someone who has like similar interests to me, I'm this sort of person who will like, okay, sit down. You like this book? Why? Why do you not like this book? And I could go on for hours, and I have, and it's so much fun to do stuff like that. The hardest part for me is taking that step after that to like taking opportunity to like have deeper conversations, which I don't know that I've ever had one of my own, like, hey, I want to do this sometime and I want to talk about this, which is kind of sad, but yeah, I feel like that's the hardest part.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know. I feel like somewhat too the hardest part is just different people's personalities and the way they communicate with each other. Especially that's something that I've realized kind of this past semester is that, I mean, everyone has different personalities and everyone communicates just differently with each other, but it's learning that not everyone's going to communicate with you like you do with someone else. And as much as sometimes like you have that one friend that you communicate with and the communication between you two seems perfect, it's not going to align with every single person and every single person you talk to and communicate with. So I would feel like that's probably the most challenging thing when it comes to friendships for me is the different personalities behind the friendships as well as the how do you communicate with each other. How do you think being a TCK has affected the way you make friendships?
It's really hard for me to tell because I've always been a TCK. I don't know how normal people make friends. For me, this is how you make friends. How non-TCKs make friends.
Yeah.
This is like this for me is how you make friends, and I wouldn't know any different. So maybe my guess is I'm a little more secluded.
For me, I think my answer is similar to Kai in that I don't know how being a TCK has affected me, because just like I don't think I would know how not being a TCK would have affected me. But I think even if it's not something that affects how I talk or approach a friend, it's always in the back of my mind that I could lose them at any moment. And I think a lot of that translates into fear, which is obviously not something that I want to be in the background of any friendship, but and I guess a more positive way to say that is I want to cling to whatever time that we do have together, that I don't want to miss the opportunity for being with people. But then sometimes hesitation, if I know that somebody is going to move in a few months, of how much can I let myself get involved in this person because I know that they're going to leave. And I think we've touched on this in other episodes as well.
Yeah, I had a while through my early teen years where I would just like, even still, like when we moved back to the States, I didn't want to make friends because I'm like, what if we move again? There's talks about maybe we might move again. We hadn't confirmed anywhere at that point, but it was still like this. I was really hesitant to try and make friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would say it's a similar experience, especially to what Kylo's was said, is that I feel like you appreciate the deeper level of friendship maybe a little more. And I mean, I know, like we said before, like this isn't for everyone. We can't speak for everyone, but at least for me, being a TCK has made me appreciate the deeper side of a friendship. The one-on-one side, the getting to know you. What are your struggles? Like, how can I help you? How can I be there for you? And then just being able to have that deep quality friendship where it's one of those friendships where you can have it that it will last longer because it was so deep, as well as you're able just to have that friendship for a really long time. Okay, so this is a specific questions that is sent in from a listener. She said, I was wondering if you feel like an outsider in other non-TCK company, or to put it any other way, are you more comfortable with people who've experienced what you've experienced, or do friendships that aren't with other TCKs feel more shallow or less fulfilling, or is it not that different once you really are friends?
So to answer our first question, yes, sometimes I do feel like an outsider in non-TCK company, not necessarily because of the differences in TCKs versus non-TCKs, but because you're going to feel like an outsider in any community that's new to you. And for me, that's kind of any non-TCK community that I've been in person. Am I more comfortable with people who have experienced what I've experienced? Once I get to know them, I wouldn't say so, no. But the initial meeting them, it's often a really easy bridge point. Just like anything that you have in common with someone would make it easier to become friends with them. Like if you play a sport, then that's an easy bridge point to become friends with them. And in a lot of the same ways, it's the same for being a TCK. You've lived overseas, you've dealt with some of the same issues, but I'm not sure that that's make or break in a friendship. And I would not say that friendships with non-TCKs are shallow or less fulfilling once we become friends, although I have experienced more difficulty in becoming friends with non-TCKs.
Yeah. To answer the first question, the first and kind of second question, for me, 100%. I am far, far more comfortable with people who have gone through with what I have. And when we moved back to the States, we went to the youth group at our church, was maybe 200 some kids. And I just kind of meandered around in the corner. I was in my own little bubble because everyone else was in their own little bubbles. Like all these people had these friends since middle school, and yeah, everyone had their own bubble. No one was really looking for more friends.
Yeah.
I don't know. To answer the fourth question, I don't know. I think I might maybe not hard disagree with Elizabeth on this one, but for me, it's like I've had some friendships with non-TCKs where I've gone some points, but occasionally just a click here or a click there where it's like, oh, I think differently than they do. And it's just a reminder of like, yeah, I don't quite fit in. And this is probably my own insecurity. And yeah, with my cousins is probably my best example. Is like, I click with most of my cousins. It's really great because we're family. We see each other a lot.
Yeah.
Summer vacation and stuff. But then just sometimes the way we think, the way we act, what we prioritize is just slightly different. And yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, everyone's experience and the way they perceive these questions is different. For me, it is kind of like a combination between Elizabeth and Kai's, because when I went back to the youth group, it felt very similar, where everyone was in their own groups. And I would say the friendships I had there were pretty shallow, but the friendships that I made in our school community were very, very deep. And it was definitely a smaller group compared to the 100 to 200 kids that were at the youth group. But like the friendships I made there lasted there and will continue to last for a really long time. And those are the friendships that I actually really appreciate. And it's not like, I feel like the matter of shallow or less fulfilling the friendship, I feel like it depends on the person, not really dependent upon whether you're a TCK or non-TCK, because it just depends on the people. And you will find friends that, I don't know, your connection, like there will be people you will meet and stuff that you just can't really have a friendship because your personalities clash, or you can be there, but you can't be really true friends. And that might be when it'd be shallow or less fulfilling. But I feel like to non-TCKs, at least for me, it's not a matter of shallow versus less fulfilling. It's just a matter of one-on-one personalities. Yeah.
I guess one of the reasons I would argue that non-TCK friendships with TCKs for me can be just as fulfilling is that even if they haven't gone through the exact same things, they're still human and they've experienced the same human emotions. So maybe I felt isolated in a community. Well, everybody experiences isolation or loneliness or not fitting in at some point in time. Even if they haven't gone through language miscommunications or experiencing cultural barriers, if I tell that story and they listen, they're still going to think it's funny, or they're still going to be able to empathize with whatever I've gone through. And so I think it's important for us as TCKs to not build walls around ourselves that don't have to be there between non-TCKs and TCKs, because even if there's been a difference in the way that we're brought up and that influences our worldview, it's not such a fundamental difference that we can't be friends with them.
It's true that there is kind of like that bridge between TCKs and TCKs when meeting other TCKs and versus TCKs with non-TCKs, just as like with sports, books, movies, or whatever. But I would say I would also like to add this, but for me, I would say it is easier to make a friend right off the bat with a TCK than a non-TCK, because you have a lot more similar experiences. But like I can just as easily make a friend with someone who hasn't experienced that part of the life that I have, though they have experienced, like Elizabeth said, they have experienced human emotions and stuff like that. So there's still stuff that we can connect on, and that will make an amazing friendship.
I guess a lot of the differences that I think of when we're talking about friendship is there's a huge difference between a one-on-one friendship and experiencing the community as a whole. As a whole, experiencing a non-TCK community for me is very difficult. But once it gets to the one-on-one level of friendship, it's a lot easier for me. And part of that is just my personality. I will feel that way regardless of the community I'm in. But it's especially shown when I go back to America and I'm in communities that I haven't been in before.
What have your experiences been with making friends with TCKs versus non-TCKs?
All right, this is really I like this question because I still have this memory of we were hanging out at our cousin's house at some time, and this family who lived in another country, they came, I guess, to just visit and talk with their parents. I guess I had no idea who they are. I've never met them before. I forget what country they were from or lived in. But I do remember that they had a son that was around my age. We clicked. Like, it was so fast. We played board games. It was just, for one afternoon, we were best friends. I have never seen him again. I kind of forget his name. But it was so, like, it's a memory that's stuck with me.
Yeah, for sure.
The main example I can think of is the 2 different youth groups that I've been in. And in both of them, I have made really good friendships. But in the one in America, I had a much harder time getting into conversation. And I think the main reason for that is not because of the way they were, but because of the just the amount of times that I would see them in a week. Because when you're overseas and you have a youth group, often that's kind of, they're present in all of your circles. They're present in your parents' work, and if you homeschool, then you go to co-op with them. If you're going to hang out, you have to hang out with them. Whereas where we were in America, we all had a youth group together, but then everybody went to different schools. Everybody had different friends outside of it. And it was just really hard to get connected with them because the only time I was seeing them was at youth group, where very minimal conversation was had. So that was really hard for me.
And I think this also goes with the kind of like how we talked before, the differences in group setting versus one-on-one, because the experiences I've had with making friends with non-TCKs, there's been a lot, and there's been so many friends that I still cherish the relationship that, or with non-TCKs. In primarily, it's because it was it was more one-on-one than a group setting, like the way we became friends. But I would say, I know we've said this before, but it's a lot harder to make friends with those who don't share like a similar experience with you when it is in a group setting compared to when it is one-on-one. When you're making friends, do you have any expectations of how they will interact with you? Does it change if they're TCKs or non-TCKs?
I can't remember if I've said this in another episode, but I come into a friendship with the expectation that they're going to misunderstand me or not understand me. And I think it can be good because it allows for me to expect that we're going to both make mistakes. And I think that's important in any relationship, whether or not it's based on cultural misunderstandings. And I think I also have the expectation that I'm going to mess up and that I'm not going to understand them. And so with that in mind, I kind of go into it trying to avoid that while knowing it's going to happen anyways. And I can't say if it works or not, but yeah, that's what I subconsciously or consciously do.
I don't know. It really, really depends on the context. And it's not that anyone is actively trying to be cold to me. It's just they have their own little friend group.
Yeah.
They're not looking for anyone. Like, oh, hey, there's a new kid. There's 200 kids in this youth group. Like, one new kid is a drop in the bucket at this point.
Yeah.
So my best friends, I would say, from the youth group was the youth pastor, the youth pastor and his wife, and then the youth pastor who was the previous one. But like, those were some of the people that I had the most talks about, or I talked to the most. And when our youth group started like doing small groups with the guys in our grade, that was like my favorite time of the entire youth group, because it's like, it's the difference between 200 and maybe like a manageable dozen kids. Like, and you can get a lot more real with a dozen guys than
for sure
a room full of kids between like 13 and 18.
Yeah. I would say that, if I'm being honest, I feel like this goes for both TCKs and non-TCKs. I kind of approach it from like a prideful perspective because of all the experiences in countries I've been to and stuff. This is not like the general, like this is, I mean, honestly, it's like a bad thing. And it's not generally what I think, but sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, like look at all of these countries that I've been to and stuff. But then in reality, I shouldn't have said that. I don't know what to say.
No, I think that's really good for you to say, because, I mean, if I'm going to compare TCKs to non-TCKs, with non-TCKs, sometimes it feels like they're not even interested in hearing my stories or even just bare minimum where I've lived, whereas with TCKs, sometimes it can be equally as hard because it starts to feel like a competition of who's done the most.
Yeah, that's true.
In a really unhealthy way, who's experienced the most trauma, like to validate your own grief and experiences. You're like, oh, well, I had to pack up my house in one day. Oh, well, my parents told me I had to leave the house 3 hours before. Or
mine was 2 hours.
I had lived there for 10 years and then we had to move because of blah, blah, blah. And I think in my own heart, and not in my heart, but in real life, my mom has had to tell me that it doesn't have to be a competition. You can feel validated in your own experiences while at the same time acknowledging others and not trying to compare your experiences with other TCKs, but to share your own and listen to them and kind of, understand them as a person and share who you are, but not try to compare the two.
Yeah, that's true.
Have either of you experienced that, where the feeling, even if it's unstated, of competition between TCKs?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I remember there's this one time where we were in a very long car ride to a restaurant in Chiang Mai, and my friend and I were arguing about how many planes we've been on, and he was saying, it's like, oh, I've been on 200 plus. I'm like, that's impossible. You're only like 13. How? Like, and I even went up to my dad and asked him how many I've been on, and it was so stupid, like, honestly, but I mean, that's kind of like some of the interactions you'll have between TCKs.
And I mean, with any kids, you're going to find something to be competitive about.
That's for sure.
And compare. But yeah.
Do you have any stories to share about making friends from other cultures?
When I first met Jonathan and Andres, if you remember them from the Bolivia episode we did a while ago, I'm trying this thing and it's becoming less and less transparent as I do it over and over again. I kind of sit someone down and I interrogate them. Okay, what are your favorite movies? Do you read books? What are your favorite books? I usually don't get to why do you like them, but it's like their response kind of gives me the feel of that type of person. Yeah. And like kind of who they are, what they enjoy. And then I can sort of talk to them better. And like when I sat down with Jonathan and Andres, when our family invited them over for dinner, the first time we met them, they are TCKs, but they haven't like lived in other countries. Yes, they've lived between Bolivia and America, but that's about it. Like they haven't, as far as I'm aware, they haven't lived elsewhere besides those two countries.
It's a very unique TCK situation, and I think it's really cool that they have two host cultures that they're equally divided between. And from my point of view, that almost makes it more difficult. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, and me and Jonathan, or Ito as we call him, because his dad is also Jonathan, so Jonathan and then Ito. Our personalities clash actually quite a bit. Like, I like to think deeply about a movie. I'm like, okay, what does this mean? What are they trying to say with this shot? And he's just like, oh, I watched an action movie. It was fun. That's it. It was fun. And I'm just like, okay, fine. But we still clicked. Because I feel like there was that semblance of we're both TCKs. We both understand what it is to be a TCK and to think a little differently than everyone else.
The story that comes to mind for me was I was 8 at a public swimming pool in China, which are nasty, by the way, but still great. I learned how to swim there. You know, with your goggles, you can see at least 4 feet into the water.
Sometimes less.
You know, if you go in the deep part, you might not be able to see your feet, but it's cool. Love those memories. So I was swimming, and I think Addie was off somewhere with my dad, so it was just kind of me paddling around, and I started talking with this Chinese girl probably for like 2 minutes. And, you know, the questions of like, oh my gosh, you're white, Laura, and you're a foreigner. And then just answering questions like that. I'm not sure if we got around to exchanging names, but right before we split up, she was like, yeah, we're best friends. Can you be my best friend? And I was like, sure. And I never saw her again.
That's kind of sad.
Not really. I mean, but it was just for her. And we were very little, so that has something to do with it. Yep. But me being surprised by how quickly she was wanting to be best friends, and we were that's totally what we were doing. So that's the example that comes to mind.
What are some general mistakes that you've made in how you deal with and perceive friendships / what are some things that you've learned?
Yeah, not taking chance or not taking the opportunities when they're in front of me, not pushing a little more to get those opportunities. Like I have a friend, we've been on like a shallow friendship basis for like 3-4 years now. And like we like occasionally talk about, oh, what's this new Star Wars thing that came out, or this new video game. Like, it's kind of sad for me, and I'm like I try to keep up every so often. We keep up with stuff, but it's like I had 2-3 years. I was in a homeschool co-op with him. We saw him every week. I've been to his house for play dates. Or, man, that makes me sound like a middle grader.
It's okay. We know you are.
But it was just, it's like, it's kind of sad for me. And also, like, in that youth group, I wish I would have found a way to, like, maybe find a few of those guys by themselves and would have had the confidence to, like, push in or sit down and, like,
yeah,
like, not because most of our conversations would have been, like, I don't know, but somewhere between deep and shallow in, like, a group setting. Yeah. You don't want to get too deep because then that gets really awkward for everyone else. But it's not shallow because you're supposed to talk about deep things.
Yeah, that's true.
So most of my conversations with those guys would have been, like, in that middle area, but I wouldn't have had small talk. Like, I never sat down and interrogated them on, what do you like to read? What do you watch? And I don't know that part about them. So, yeah, there's just parts I didn't know about them, and I still don't know about them, and I wouldn't consider them my friend.
Yeah. I think a mistake that I've made is going into a friendship and feeling like we can't be friends until they know all this history about me. And I think going back to America, whenever I make friends, I think I need to kind of let go of being a TCK is not the only thing that defines who I am, and I can be a friend with someone without them knowing all that. And yeah, I agree with Kai and just being brave to take the step to make friends.
Do you have any other advice that you would like to add about friendships that revolve around TCKs or non-TCKs?
Yeah, I feel woefully underqualified for this question, but take the opportunities when you get them. Know that, unlike Dash from The Incredibles, it defines who I am. It doesn't. Being a TCK does not define 100% of who you are. It's your experiences and what you're doing. So, like, goodness, I sound like mom. Choose to make friends. You have to choose to, like, reach out. If you want friends, go get them.
I think I'd also like to say that if you're having a hard time making a friend, doesn't mean it's necessarily your fault. There are so many other things or reasons why it might be hard. Like, I don't know, their schedule. They might be busy with school. And for a really long time, I felt like when I wasn't making friends or didn't have a community, it was my fault. And I don't think that helped make friends. I think it harmed it because it came through in a negative way.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Jetlagged Podcast. If you would like to ask us any questions or just reach out or suggest any episodes that you would want to hear, you could reach us at jetlaggedpodcats@gmail.com. Again, that is jetlaggedpodcats@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope to see you next time.